What's the most bizarre thing you swear you saw but don't have any proof of? Not so much something I saw, but something I heard, and definitely knew was there, even though I didn't see it. I was about 16 or 17, a pretty spacey teenager, and I would sometimes forget to lock the door when I got home late after hanging out with friends. One night, I got home around midnight and went straight upstairs to bed. I was half asleep around 1:30 in the morning when I was jolted awake by the sound of cabinets opening and closing in the kitchen, directly below my bedroom. My mom has always been an early to bed, early to rise kind of person, so it was strange for her to be down there at that hour. I peeked out my bedroom door and listened, hoping it really was her. She has severe asthma, so she does this throat-clearing cough every couple of minutes. I didn't hear that. And all the kitchen lights were off, which was completely unlike her, or any normal person who was actually doing something in the kitchen. I suddenly realized, in full-blown panic, that I might have left the front door unlocked again, as in, oh no, actual burglars. Before calling the police and causing a huge scene, I wanted to be absolutely sure, so I crept down the hall to my mom's room. It was only about 4 feet from mine. I peeked into her room, and there she was, fast asleep and snoring in bed. My cat, the only other living thing in the house, was curled up right next to her. The cabinets were still opening and closing downstairs. Because I was an idiot back then, I turned on the main entryway lights. The moment the switch flipped, I heard a quick shuffling sound, like someone trying to sneak out of the kitchen as fast as possible without making too much noise. I was about to call the police when I heard the basement door shut. That door was slightly too big for the frame, so it always made a very distinct scrape-thud sound when it closed. Again, being a complete idiot, I went downstairs and pressed my ear against the basement door. I didn't hear anything, and I could tell the basement lights were off. It was a creepy, unfinished basement, so if anyone was hiding down there, they were probably hoping to get out as soon as possible. I finally realized I was being a huge idiot just hanging out downstairs with whoever this was, so I ran back upstairs to hide and call the police. After I got to my room and locked the door, I heard the front door slam shut. Like, slam shut. The kind of slam you get when it's windy outside and a window is open. I peeked out my bedroom window to see if anyone was on the front porch or out on the lawn. It was a well-lit neighborhood, so I figured I should have been able to see someone if they were there. Nothing. I listened for any more sounds from downstairs. Still nothing. I waited about 10 minutes staring out the window before I convinced myself there was nobody outside. Then, again, being a clueless teenager, I decided to go downstairs and check one last time before I actually called the police. All of the doors and windows in the house were locked, including the front door, and a few of the cabinets in the kitchen were still ajar. At that point, I finally wised up and called the police. They came out, I made a report, and they searched the entire house along with the area around it for any sign that someone had been creeping around. They found nothing. I'm not a believer in the paranormal, but that was some creepy poltergeist-level stuff if anything ever was. My mom didn't wake up until the police arrived. She didn't believe me and was annoyed at all the commotion I had caused. Story 2. This happened just the other day. I recently got myself a new AR, and I haven't had much chance to shoot it or sight it in yet. I also bought a 60-round drum that I'd been dying to test out. I live in Kentucky and a bit out in the country, so I have plenty of land to shoot on and don't have to drive to a range. I grabbed my gun, some ammo, and started walking. After about 10 steps into the forest, I got an extremely strange feeling, like I was being watched or followed. I ignored it and kept going, but the farther I walked, the worse it got. The magazine for my gun was unloaded, and the feeling of being watched got so intense that I actually stopped and hurriedly loaded 20 rounds into it. As I was loading, I caught a smell and heard flies buzzing. I turned around, and there was a somewhat fresh dead rabbit behind me. At that point, the feeling of being watched was unbearable. I loaded the magazine into my gun and kept the bolt held open so I could chamber a round instantly if I had to. As I was walking alongside a creek, I heard a big splash that startled me. When I looked over, I saw something I have never seen before, and hope I never see again. It was about 7 or 8 feet tall, super skinny, and walking on its hind legs. Its coloring was similar to a deer's. To give you an idea of how thin it was, I told my friend, who weighs around 120 pounds, to imagine himself stretched to 8 feet tall. That's how narrow this thing looked. I never got a look at its head, but I was so shocked by what I saw that I could barely move. All I heard was the splash, then the sound of it moving along the creek bank, and then it disappeared. I never heard another noise from that direction. I tried to chamber round in my gun, but of course it jammed and wouldn't work properly, something that could have easily gotten me killed. I contacted the company afterward and told them I wanted my money back or a replacement that would actually function. As for what I saw, I have no idea. I'm not sure if I imagined it, actually saw it, or what. I say that because I never heard another sound from that area again, and something that big should have made noise moving through brush and weeds, but I'm certain I saw something. I've talked to my friends about it, and they've suggested it might have been a Wendigo. As for proof, I definitely didn't feel like going down to an isolated creek where I'd have no easy way out, just to look for tracks, hair, or anything else with an unknown creature nearby. Normally, I don't spook easily, but I've been on edge for about a week because of this. I don't know what I'm supposed to do if I really did see something out there. I'd heard of Wendigos before, but I never thought I'd actually see one. What scares me even more is that about 3 years ago, a good friend who lives only about 2 miles from me says he saw a Wendigo at his house too. Story 3. I was 6 years old when this happened on Christmas Eve, 1972. I woke up sometime after midnight because I had to go to the bathroom. Up to that point, and ever since, I almost never woke up in the middle of the night, even if I woke in the morning with a full bladder. But that night, I got out of bed, wandered down the hall, used the bathroom, and then stepped toward the door. I paused because I heard something in the hallway. We had cats, so that was my first thought. Thinking I might be able to startle one and make it jump, something I still never get tired of, I opened the door very slowly and quietly, planning to stomp on the floor and make it scramble. That's when movement at the end of the hall caught my eye. I hadn't opened the door all the way yet, so I could only just see into the living room. We kept the porch light on, so the area near the front door was slightly illuminated. I could see the Christmas tree. Its lights were off. And standing next to it was a figure. He was adult-sized, large, with big, fluffy clothes and a Santa hat. By his outline, I could tell he had a big beard. I couldn't see details or color because the light was so faint, just enough to make out silhouettes. He was bent over slightly with his arm extended as if he were reaching for the door. My first thought wasn't, why is he coming through the front door? We didn't have a fireplace, but if he sees me, I won't get any presents. So my 6-year-old brain decided the best thing to do was to sprint back to my bedroom, jump into bed, and pretend to be asleep. Of course, running down the hall put me in full view of Santa, but did I mention I was 6? The most bizarre part is that as I was running to my room, I kept my eyes on him. And just before I reached my bedroom door, he simply vanished. I stopped and looked. Then, quite bravely for a 6-year-old, I walked over and turned on the hall light. But no one was there at the end of the hall. Christmas morning came, and we had the usual presents under the tree. Every year, Santa would leave unwrapped gifts at the end of the hall for my brothers and me, yes, the same hall that opened into the living room. I learned later, of course, that my parents put those there to make them seem like they came from Saint Nick. I didn't mention seeing him because I'd been taught that if you saw Santa, you would never get presents. I thought I had pulled off the coup of the century, and I was not about to ruin that. Some years later, I asked my mom if there had ever been a time when I or my brothers got a present from Santa that they didn't put at the end of the hall, something neither parent knew the origin of. She said, "Only once, when you were young. You got a knife, and we didn't buy it for you because we thought you were too young for one. But we let you keep it anyway." Why? I just smiled at her and said, "Just wondering." Can you guess what year I got my first folding knife? My parents slept with their door open. Both of them were in bed. Their bedroom was right next to the bathroom. My 2 brothers and I shared a bedroom. They had bunk beds, and both were occupied. The only other person it could have been was one particular neighbor my parents trusted with a key to our house. The problem with that theory is that he was about 6'5", and the figure at the end of the hall was not. I had never sleepwalked before, and I never have since. When I wake up, I'm alert. and my eyes have never played tricks on me to the extent of making me see something as real as a full-grown person moving around. Nothing like that ever happened again, but to this day, I maintain that I saw Santa Claus that night. Story 4. Ghost. My cousin and I were around 13 and 15. He lived in a small town on the Ohio River in Ohio, Shadyside. It was summer, a hot and humid day, and we were desperate for anything to cool us off. When it started to downpour in the late morning, we went outside and played in it. But after the storm passed, the sun came out in full force again, and it went right back to being unbearably hot. So, we grabbed our bikes and rode down to the river. We wanted to take the trail that ran along the water and splash through the puddles. There was only one trail, and it went south, out of town. To the left were about 20 to 50 feet of dense trees, and then the river. No bank, just trees going straight to the water. To the right was waist-high grass, then the train tracks, then the backyards. We were riding along the path, which was mostly straight except for a couple of bends. The rain had washed it clean, so there were no footprints except for one set. We rode down the path and went around a small bend. And there she was, what looked like an old woman. But I never really saw her, because she was covered from head to toe as if it were winter. She wore leather boots that reminded me of the kind people wore on Little House on the Prairie, a heavy faded black dress and what seemed like layers of wool. She even had a scarf wrapped tightly around her head. I rode up beside her trying to get around, but she never reacted to me at all. I never saw her face, even though I was slightly ahead of her. The scarf was wrapped in a way that really stood out, almost like she was blocking the wind. Except there was no wind that day, not even a breeze. I started getting freaked out. My cousin was behind me. He and I both stopped and looked at each other like, what the hell? We stopped, turned around, and went back around the bend, which was maybe 20 feet behind us. We talked about the weird vibes she gave off and decided we would just ride around her. Then we turned back and went around the bend again. The trail was straight for a long stretch after that, and the old woman was gone. Her footprints ended in a puddle, and she had not been moving fast. She had maybe 1 minute when we couldn't see her. She obviously hadn't gone into the woods. They were far too dense. Our first thought was that maybe she had fallen and was on the other side of the tall grass to the right. So we walked through the grass and checked up and down the train tracks. Nothing. We looked into the backyards beyond the tracks. Nothing there either. There weren't even fences to block the view. Then we turned back toward our bikes and noticed that we could clearly see where we had walked through the grass, but there was no disturbed grass where her footprints had ended. She had simply disappeared. We sprinted out of there and never went back. That was about 20 years ago, and my cousin and I still talk about it. It really freaked us out. Story 5. Well, I have a little proof since my best friend saw it with me, but I witnessed two creatures walk past me in May 2005, not far from Right Pat AFB. It was morning, nobody was around, but it was definitely daylight. I first saw the two of them coming out of a forest from about 150 yards away, and I could tell they looked odd. There was a tall one and a short one. The tall one had a very, very unusual gait. Its legs and torso moved and swayed in a way I had never seen before. I realized they would pass near my destination, and when I got there, they were out of sight for a moment. But then they came down the street right past me, maybe 10 to 15 yards away. What I saw has confused us for 12 years now. The details are fuzzy, not just because it has been 12 years, but because it was a lot to take in at once, and many of the details were completely bewildering. First, the two were holding hands and wearing clothes. They appeared intelligent, and they looked at us while we stared at them. It felt as though we were intruding on an intimate moment. The tall one was mostly legs. It was roughly 8 feet tall, with about 6 of those feet being legs, and it was extremely slender. Its legs were long and human-colored, just a bit on the pale side. The torso moved in a very strange way, and the head looked entirely inhuman. It had a clear nose and eyes, but its features were animal-like, with more of a snout than a normal nose and mouth. The most confusing part was its outfit. It was wearing a pink nightie and long matching stockings. The outfit was so bizarre that I remember those stockings most of all. It made zero sense. The smaller one looked like a cross between an Ewok and an old Chinese kung fu master. It was covered in hair, stood about 4 or 5 feet tall, and had more expressive, though dark, eyes. It was wearing a jumpsuit of some sort, almost like a uniform or perhaps a Chinese-style suit with buttons and loops. Their demeanor as they passed us felt passively hostile, as if we were a nuisance. Nevertheless, they walked on by, and I never saw them again. I've wondered whether they were aliens or cryptids, but I try not to obsess over it. Every so often, I call my friend and ask if he still remembers everything. He does, but we are both still clueless. We wonder whether they chose such ridiculous outfits to obscure their more unfamiliar features, or whether those outfits are standard in their world. We also wonder if they had simply come out of the woods for a stroll through a small Ohio town, the way we might go for a hike in the forest. Either way, I now know there is more going on in the woods than I ever realized. Story 6. I had a vivid dream where I was screaming, crying, and pounding on an invisible barrier at my bedroom door. I was desperately trying to wake up my boyfriend to stop a demon version of me from tearing his face off. When I woke up, I saw myself standing at the door. I wasn't hallucinating or imagining it. I sleep with the lights on and I could see everything clearly. Edit. Most people are assuming it was sleep paralysis, but I want to clarify that I experience sleep paralysis fairly often if I sleep on my back, and this felt nothing like that. Now that I've had more time to write it out, this is exactly what I experienced. I had a dream, though I didn't realize it was a dream at the time, where I was going to bed like normal. I did my usual routine and nothing felt strange, but when I went to walk into my room, I couldn't. It was as if there were some kind of barrier blocking the doorway. I looked toward the bed and saw myself already sleeping in it. Naturally, at this point, I was freaking out. Then the me in the bed sat up and looked directly at me. She smiled, and her body began to change. Her face looked like someone had thrown acid on it, melting and sliding off in pieces. She got off the bed and moved onto all fours. Her body twisted unnaturally until her chest was facing the ceiling and her hands and feet were backward. I started screaming and pounding on the barrier, begging and pleading for my partner to wake up. The creature started coming toward me, and as it reached the door, its body contorted again. It began to stand up on 2 legs. As its face rose to meet mine, I woke up. I immediately started freaking out. I had no idea it had been a dream until that exact moment. I sat up in bed, crying and breathing hard, and then I saw it. I saw myself at my bedroom door, screaming and pounding on it. And then, nothing. As soon as I saw myself standing there, I vanished. Just to be clear, I was fully awake at this point. I could sit up, move around, everything. I didn't wake up again afterward. It was like waking from a dream and then seeing yourself still acting out the dream. Story 7. This happened about 16 years ago, when I was 7 or 8. I was at my grandma's house. She lives on an old road. And at the end of that road, there's a small park with a swing set, a slide, and a couple of other things. It was around 8:30 on a summer evening, and everything felt strangely quiet and calm, like it was about to storm, even though the sky was completely clear. I had been swinging for a while, and it was starting to get dark, so I went to jump off the swing and head back to my grandma's. When I landed, I twisted my ankle and ended up sitting on the ground, crying. All of a sudden, I got that awful feeling that someone was watching me. I looked around, but didn't see anyone. Then I looked toward the house to my right. It was an empty house, not run down, just vacant. In the attic window, I saw a pale white face. The room behind it was completely dark, but the face stood out clearly. It was laughing at me with this evil expression like it was actually glad I was in pain. I got up and ran back to my grandma's house as fast as I could. I don't even remember if I told anyone when it happened, but I still get chills thinking about it. My cousin and I always thought that park was haunted. I eventually told him the story, and he said the park was built on top of a house that had burned down, so maybe there's something behind it. But I really don't know. Story 8. A shadow person. It was midsummer, and my friend and I were jogging around our school's track just as it was getting dark, around 9 in the evening. We looked across the football field to our left and saw a dark figure taking a few steps on the opposite side of the track. In the time it takes to read that sentence, the figure suddenly began sprinting, faster than I have ever seen any human move in my life. It must have covered at least 100 meters before it simply vanished. "Did you just see that?" my friend asked. "What was that?" I replied. "I have no idea, but it was fast." We rushed off the track and went straight into the school's weight room to tell our wrestling coach, the only other person around. He brushed it off and laughed, thinking we were trying to prank him. That was 19 years ago. My friend and I used to remind each other about that figure from time to time and talk about what we thought it was. Since then, he has been in 2 major car accidents and lost some memories, including this one. Now I'm the only one who remembers. Story 9. In 1997, I was 17. I was driving my girlfriend home late at night, and we were sitting at a stoplight on an overpass above the freeway. An 80s Dodge Omni came flying up to the light across from us and barely managed to stop while the light was still red. I looked across at the driver. He looked panicked and frazzled. Then I looked at the passenger, and that's when everything got real. There was a girl with duct tape wrapped around her face and shoulders. Her hair was a mess, and she was crying. It took me a few seconds to even process what I was seeing. I looked at my girlfriend, and she looked at me, and she burst into tears and said, "What the hell is going on in that car?" No sooner did I look back than the guy pulled forward and turned the wrong way onto a one-way service road along the freeway. In Michigan, it's common for northbound freeway traffic to have a northbound local road beside it. He turned south. I freaked the hell out. I threw my car in reverse, backtracked, and started flying down city streets trying to catch up with him. We did see him again. He hit a turnaround onto 8 Mile, and he didn't have a plate on his car. I hurried home since I was only about half a mile from where we had last seen him. I rushed inside and called the cops while my girlfriend frantically tried to tell my mom what we had seen. The cops came and took our story. There was never any missing persons report that matched what we described. My mom never really believed us. It was written off as 2 teens with overactive imaginations. But I know what I saw. I'm a man in my 30s now, and I will never forget the look on that girl's face, or the crazed look in that guy's eyes. My girlfriend, who later became my wife and is now my ex, remembers it vividly too. It was one of the most messed up nights of both our lives. Story 10. I once woke up in the middle of the night to what felt like an earthquake. Not uncommon where I live, nothing huge, but big enough. I was sitting there riding it out, watching my cat freak out on my bed when I realized it wasn't stopping. In fact, it was getting more violent. Then I noticed something even worse. Only my bed was shaking. The rest of the room wasn't moving at all. I remember doing everything I could to check whether this was just a vivid dream, pinching myself, checking my phone, and everything checked out. When it finally stopped, I didn't want to get off the bed for fear that something was going to reach out from underneath and grab me. I waited for my cat, my one and only witness, to jump down first before I sprinted to my parents' room. I still can't convince myself something logical happened. If I hadn't been so calm at the beginning, and if my cat hadn't been there freaking out too, I would have just assumed I hallucinated the whole thing and moved on with my life. Story 11. A serial killer. About a decade ago, I was walking home absolutely blasted from a party. A really faraway party. I was broke and had no money for a cab, so I just walked. Around 4 in the morning, a pickup truck pulled up beside me and the driver asked if I needed a lift. I looked him over. Younger, Asianish guy, much smaller than me. So, I got in. He had a half-drunk bottle of something next to him. We made small talk as he drove me about 4 miles. When we got close enough, I told him he could let me out right there. He asked if I wanted to hang out and party. I politely said no. He asked again. The truck was stopped, so I got out, thanked him for the ride, and walked the last half-mile home. I still remember the stupid grin he gave me as I closed the door. A couple of years later, I saw on the news that they had arrested a guy suspected of being a serial killer. They showed his face, and I thought, why do I know that guy? And then it hit me. I think that was the guy from the pickup truck. Story 12. Back in middle school in 1998, our band took a trip to the National Air and Space Museum. One of the exhibits had Microsoft Flight Simulator set up so you could fly around Washington, D.C. I was waiting my turn with my friends when we noticed the plane on the screen flying really low. I didn't know DC geography at the time, but my friend said, "Whoa, he's trying to land that jet on the White House lawn." I remember joking that there was no way a plane would ever get that low and that there had to be some kind of defenses around the White House. Just clueless middle school video game logic. The person using the simulator overheard us, turned around, and stared at us for a few seconds. It felt much longer. Something about the moment gave me chills, though I couldn't explain why. He muttered something under his breath and then walked away. I don't remember his exact appearance, only that the encounter felt unsettling to me at the time. When 2001 happened and we saw the footage in class, I asked my friend if he remembered that moment at the museum. He didn't, and he told me I was just being paranoid. Story 13. I moved out of home when I was 21 and found a 3-bedroom cottage with super cheap rent, located on the property of a large church. The reason the rent was so low was because I had to do a security check of the church each night before going to bed. The property was about 10 acres in a quiet suburb. During the day, it looked beautiful, almost like a small farm, but at night, it was scary as hell. Anyway, one night, I got a knock on the door at 3 in the morning. My first thought was that it was the police and that someone had broken into the church. It was a contemporary church with thousands of dollars worth of music equipment and a full sound system. But when I opened the door, there was an older woman standing there with a crow on her shoulder and a couple of suitcases. Inside, I was freaking out, but I told myself I needed to stay calm and keep a confident composure to maintain control of the situation. I asked her who she was and why. She was at my door at 3 in the morning. She said she was the new pastor of the church, which I knew wasn't true, and that she was moving into her new house, my house. I politely told her that no one had informed me of a new pastor moving in and that she would need to come back when the church opened the next morning. She disagreed and started getting a bit aggressive, raising her voice. I began thinking about shutting the door in her face and calling the police, but I decided to give it one more try to calm her down. I told her she could move in tomorrow, but right now I was cleaning the place to get it ready for her, so she would need to come back in the morning. She backed down when she heard that and agreed to leave. By this point, I was really shaken up and definitely on edge. As she turned around to go, she said, "Don't worry, love. You don't need to worry about me." "It's the guy over there you need to worry about," she said, pointing toward the bushes about 30 meters away. And sure enough, there was a big bald man squatting in the bushes, staring straight at me. Holy hell. At that point, my fight-or-flight response kicked in, and I yelled, without even thinking, "If you don't get out of here right now, I'm going inside to grab my axe and mess you up." He didn't move. So I went inside and grabbed my axe. As I picked it up, I thought, if he's still out there when I come back, am I really going to hit him? I walked outside, and the moment he saw me holding the axe, he bolted down the driveway. I felt an overwhelming sense of relief and went back inside to call the police. The police arrived about 10 minutes later, and when they pulled up, they already had the woman and the bald man in the back of the car. They had picked them up at the end of the long driveway. I told the officers what had happened, and they explained that they had dealt with the two of them before. They were from the local psychiatric home and slipped out regularly because it was a low-security facility. In a way, I was relieved to hear that, and the officers took them away. That was that. I couldn't sleep afterwards, so I ended up going to my girlfriend's place to calm down. That was just one of the creepy stories I have from living there, but it was by far the worst. Story 14. When I was 10, we had a 14-year-old German Shepherd who was getting very sick. I was home alone for a moment while my mom went to the neighbors to pick up a book or something. Our German Shepherd came over, convinced me to walk outside with him, and started licking my hands. He looked at me, then ran off, jumped the fence, and never came back. He was so loyal and good that, to this day, no one believes me and thinks he was stolen because he would never leave. I'm almost certain he did that because he didn't want us to see him die and wanted to go into the forest and do his thing. I miss you, buddy. Story 15. I'm not a superstitious person, so I've chalked this up as a strange coincidence. Still, when it comes to unsettling things, this series of events is by far the spookiest. It all happened within the span of 2 weeks last year. First, I was walking home extremely late from work. I worked until about 3 in the morning and decided to take the long walk home that night. Not too strange for me. I used to live in the country and would go on late-night walks down dirt roads. There's something about walking in eerie atmospheres that relaxes me more than any other kind of walk. I'm not sure why. Anyway, I took a road that led away from the city and into the woods so there wouldn't be cars flying past me. The next thing I know, I hear a rustle in the trees. I look over and see someone about 20 feet into the brush with a perfectly white blanket draped over their head. I froze and stared for a moment, then slowly kept walking while I clutched my multi-tool in my pocket and flipped out its knife. After I moved on for a few seconds, the person simply took off into the woods, and that was that. It gave me the creeps, but I pegged it as either a homeless guy or some teenager messing around on drugs. The next night, I decided to walk to the store around 11:30 at night. It's a pretty long walk, so I wasn't back until about 12:45. I live in a really nice neighborhood, and right next to my apartment is a small convenience store that closes at 11. As I approached my place, I saw a girl dressed in all white, head to toe. White heels, a short white dress, a white fur vest, a massive white hat. Her hair was blonde, and she even had a long, thin cigarette. She looked like she had just walked out of a fancy 1930s costume party. She was standing in the middle of the closed convenience store parking lot, paying no attention to me as I passed. I had no idea why she was there at that hour, but once again, it gave me the creeps, especially after remembering the night before. So I get into work on Monday and tell a few people about my strange encounters to spook them. Everyone tells me to stop walking at night, and I decide that's probably a good idea. I jokingly say, I don't want to risk running into the third white figure. The next Sunday, I realize I'm out of toothpaste, so I hop in my car and drive to the store. On the way back, I approach a stop sign with a crosswalk. The road is completely empty at that hour, but I come to a complete stop. I always do. Apparently, I wasn't paying close attention because the moment I pressed the gas, someone stepped onto the crosswalk and I slammed the brakes. I immediately gestured an apologetic wave, and that's when I realized it was a kid. Not just any kid, an albino kid. He didn't seem bothered and just slowly strolled past my car. I was already flustered from my mistake, but for a brief moment, thinking about the two people I had seen before and how I had joked about a third, I nearly lost it. I was so creeped out. I got home and immediately chalked it all up to coincidence. I had never seen an albino person before, so that made the last one especially shocking. But still, I don't walk at night anymore. Story 16. Before my sister was born, my parents found a kitten. They decided to keep her because they couldn't find an owner, and they named her Princess. My sister is 4 years older than I am, and we both grew up with this cat. She would sometimes follow us around and watch over us. My parents used to joke that she thought of us as her own kittens. My sister wasn't very nice to me. It took a long time and a lot of people to realize it wasn't just normal sibling cruelty. It was real abuse and bullying. She's a narcissist, but that's not the point. When I was too young to understand what was happening, I used to talk to Princess. She was like my diary. I would sit with this creature who had been around longer than I had and tell her all my problems. One day at a store, my mom told us she would buy us each a lolly. My sister wanted a different one than I did, and she grabbed my arm and clawed her nails down it hard enough to draw blood. It hurt a lot, and I was really upset. When we got home, I went and cried to Princess about how scared I had felt. After a while, I calmed down and started playing with my toys. Princess ambled out of the room. A few minutes later, I heard a shriek and she ambled back in. It turned out she had walked up to my sister, scratched her hand, hissed at her, and then returned to sit with me and watch over me while I played. My parents assumed my sister provoked her, but I know better. Princess walked out of the room right after I had been talking to her, and she came back in right after the shriek. I can't prove it, but I think she saw how scared I was and wanted to show me she would protect me. I've never told anyone about my white and gray guardian, apart from my current cat. I haven't thought about Princess in a while. She lived to be between 19 and 21. Depending on how old she was when my parents found her, she lived with them for 19 years and was around 2 when they got her. I loved that cat. Funnily enough, my new cat was originally my sister's. She got him, then left him with my parents, and he slowly became mine. He likes sitting with me more than he likes her. Story 17. When I was about 10 or 11, we were having a get-together at my grandma's house for the holidays. All of us cousins played all day, and when night fell, we switched to hide and seek. While the adults smoked and drank up by the house, we stayed at the back of the property just having a good time. I was hiding between a bush and the property fence when I heard the strangest sound. It was almost a scream, both happy and miserable at the same time. I jumped up and shouted. All my cousins heard it, and we all saw it too. It was an animal on two legs, and it ran off with these really jerky, unnatural motions. Being the oldest by about 3 years, I calmed down the crying little ones and explained as best I could that it was just someone trying to scare us. But I've had nightmares about that sound. In my mind, it still feels like a grotesque mimicry of our own joyful screams and laughter as we played. None of my cousins today will admit to even remembering the incident, although the adults remembered the commotion it caused. Story 18. In 1994, on a farm in the southern Midwest United States, 5-year-old me had this huge yellow lab, the sweetest dog in the world, who one day suddenly lost her mind barking and ran outside. Being 5, I followed her and watched as she sprinted out into the cow pasture where the cows were suspiciously nowhere in sight and went toe-to-toe with a gray wolf. That area at that time was definitely not wolf country. Coyotes, sure, but there was no way this was a coyote. The thing towered over my lab, and I'd seen plenty of coyotes before to know this wasn't one. My lab barked her head off right in his face, and after about a minute he tilted his head, turned around, and disappeared into the woods. We later found all the cows at the opposite end of the pasture, circled around the 2 calves we had. They were never that terrified of coyotes, and they had zero fear of domestic dogs. My lab literally used to climb over them when they lay down and tug on their tails. The cows didn't care at all. I will go to my grave saying it was a wolf I saw, but nobody believes me. I've spent years researching wolves and wolf hybrids, and every picture I've seen of both the animal and the paw prints he left tells me it was very, very, very much more wolf than coyote, dog, or any kind of mix. Story 19. In the 1990s, I was such an exercise freak, at least 4 hours a day of walking and hill climbing. I was getting pretty cut off from current events and the news. One day, around 3 in the afternoon, I was on my way home. I was crossing the street in front of our local grocery store, and there was this man on the other side. His hair was a mess, sticking straight up. His clothes weren't torn, but they were completely disarranged, like he had walked out of a blast zone, just cleaner. He was looking around silently, clearly confused. Homeless people were really uncommon in my area at that time and usually couch surfed rather than slept outside. He looked too well off to be living on the streets, and he didn't seem to have any idea where he was. He eventually turned left and wandered off before I finished crossing. That night, the local news came on. A school teacher from a couple of towns over had drowned that afternoon. They flashed his picture on the screen. It was the man I had seen. I would swear to it. Detail I forgot. They never found his body. I didn't go to the cops. It didn't even occur to me at the time. My gut instinct when I saw him on the news was that he was a ghost. The street had been very crowded, yet no one reacted to him at all. The whole thing had a strange, unsettling feeling to it. And this isn't a region where going to the police is always a helpful move. I was pretty gun-shy back then because I had been a witness in an assault case, and it ended up causing severe, lasting consequences for me, with very little benefit to the victim. He wasn't wet, just shocked and confused looking. I'd be surprised if he faked his death. By all accounts, he was a decent man with nothing to run from. I'm sorry, I don't have more answers. This story haunted me precisely because there are none. Story 20. When I was about 7 or 8, I was spending the night at my grandmother's house in West Virginia with my brother and sister. It was a Friday night, and we were watching old school TGIF. There was a knock at the door, and I jumped up to answer it. My grandma was in her bedroom and didn't hear it. I wasn't supposed to answer the door on my own, but I loved doing it. I opened the door, and no one was there. I stepped outside and looked left and right. To the right, beside the door, my grandma kept a small table. Sitting on that table was a mandrill, one of those primates like Rafiki from The Lion King. I don't remember it moving. I just remember it sitting there staring at me. I freaked out and slammed the door. My grandma came running out, and I told her there was a monkey outside. She ran out, and my brother and sister ran to the door to see it. I'll never forget running out again and seeing that the table was empty. My grandma told me not to tell tall tales and reminded me that I wasn't supposed to open the door without her. It has been over 20 years now, and my brother and sister still tease me for seeing a monkey. I've searched online to see if any mandrills escaped from a zoo in rural West Virginia back then, but no luck. Still, the memory is so clear that I'm sure it was really there. Story 21. I went outside early one morning and saw a woman kneeling in my mother's flower garden. I was a little sketched out. I was about 10, and there was a stranger just sitting in the middle of our garden. Not knowing what else to do, I said hello to her. She turned around, immediately apologized for being in our yard, and said our flowers were so nice she couldn't help herself. Then she walked away. I thought it was cute, didn't think anything more of it, and went on with my day. Later, my mom and dad left to run errands, and my brother and I were home alone, watching TV. Without any warning, someone tapped my shoulder from behind. I freaked out, turned around, and she was standing right behind my brother and me. She apologized over and over, then asked where my mom and dad were. I told her they would be back any time, but that she really shouldn't be coming into people's houses. She agreed and asked for a pen and a piece of paper, saying she wanted to write them a note. I complied and told her to do it out in the dining room. I peeked from behind the corner in the hallway and never let her out of my sight. I was beyond afraid. She calmly set the pen down, shouted "thank you" from the dining room, and then walked out the front door. I bolted to the window to make sure she was gone, then ran to the door and locked it. Only then did I nervously and very slowly approach the note she had left on the table. I read the note and was dumbfounded. She wrote that she believed God had spoken to her in the garden and told her to build an altar to her grandmother. The note was her trying to schedule an appointment with my mom to discuss placing a tombstone and a prayer table in the garden. When my parents got home, I freaked out and told them my mom needed to talk to this woman. She had left her phone number on the note. My mom took the next day off work, sat out on the porch at the time the woman had written, and waited for her to arrive. She never showed up. My mom called the number on the note only to get a disconnected message. The only proof I ever had of any of it was the note she left. My mom and dad don't believe most of the story, and even my brother seems to have forgotten it, but I know it happened. Story 22. I don't know how many people I've told this to, but nobody believes me, and honestly, I understand why. When I was around 8 years old, I was on vacation in Europe with my cousin, and she got me a helium shark balloon at the zoo. When we were getting into the car, I let go of the balloon for some reason and watched it float away into the sky. Devastated, I tried to forget about it. About 2 weeks later, still on vacation, we went to my mom's village about 700 kilometers away. On the first day at my mom's family home, we went for a walk around the property. In the corner of the field, I saw it. My shark balloon had floated into my very own backyard to find me again. Story 23. I watched a white light hovering in the distance between two mountains. Then it moved up, then down. At that point, I called my buddies outside to see it. We all watched as it moved side to side, then in a perfect clockwise circle, then anti-clockwise. Next, it started doing tight figure eights in one direction, then back the other way. After that, it moved diagonally to the left and back to center, then diagonally to the right and back to center. While we watched, we tried to figure out what it could be. A helicopter, a really skilled pilot, some kind of spotlights, but the speed it moved, the way it didn't waver even slightly, and how smooth the motion was left us without any explanation. As we kept discussing it, the light started moving even faster. Up, down, and diagonally. Then it shot off to the right at a speed we could barely track. It was suddenly about 3 kilometers away on the other side of the mountain. And then, without warning, it took off straight up toward the stars until it was gone. Story 24. I was surf fishing at night with a friend when I was about 15. A hurricane was forming down south, so the Jersey shore was really rough that night. We saw lights appear out over the water and move toward shore. They were rotating, and the lights along the edge let us see how fast the whole thing was spinning. It came toward us and hovered a few hundred feet offshore, the lights spinning faster and faster. Then it started drifting north slowly while the rotation kept speeding up. All of a sudden, it just took off at an insane rate of speed. By the time it disappeared over Barnegat Lighthouse, we were stunned. When we went back to check our poles, we started reeling in our lines, but both of our lures were lying on the beach behind us, about 30 yards downshore. We were using striper lures, each with around 3 ounces of weight, so there was no way a cast could have blown backward in the wind and landed that far behind us. I also remember the clock reading 11:30 when we got home. and I couldn't believe we had spent 5 hours down there fishing. We used to talk about that night all the time when he'd visit the shore house. My parents would just laugh at us. He took his own life a year and a half ago, so I can't ask him for any more details now, but I'll never forget it. One of my best memories with him. Rest in peace, Jay. Story 25. While having a picnic at dusk by an airfield in San Antonio in either 1996 or 1997, my girlfriend and I saw a space shuttle land and get taken away, without anyone else around. I remember thinking the air traffic was pretty light. I was bummed because normally there were a lot of big Air Force transports landing there, but that particular evening, there was nothing. Then I saw something coming in very fast and very steep. I could tell it was a shuttle before it even touched down. It was an unidentified spacecraft, literally. It had no markings that I can recall. It was met immediately by one of those tow truck rigs and taken straight to a hangar. The doors were closed right after. No press, no personnel, nothing. It wasn't until later that I read about the CIA's Blue Space program. Story 26. 10 years ago, I spent a summer in Alaska in a small coastal town. For several nights, a feral cat would skulk around my house and make weird noises. It looked as unfortunate as it sounded. Patchy fur, possible mange, a bad leg. Then, one night, I nearly stepped on its dead body while walking home. I called for my friends in the house and they came out with a garbage bag and a shovel. We poked the cat with the shovel, checking for any sign of life or identification. Nothing. We tied it up in the garbage bag, found a spot off a dirt path, and buried it. About a week later, walking home in the dark with a friend, I heard a familiar sound. I raised a flashlight. Ahead of me, no more than 20 feet away, was that same cat. Same messed up fur. Same injuries. I was stunned. I turned to my friend, and he looked mortified. We watched in silence as the cat casually walked out of the beam of the flashlight and disappeared, never to be seen again. To this day, I have no explanation. Maybe it was a sibling that happened to look exactly like the one we buried and had the same injuries. Guess this might be why I'm more of a dog person. Story 27. I was a student at Central Michigan back in the year 2000, and I was driving back to campus. A pickup truck started tailgating me really closely on a rural 2-lane road. Like anyone would, I was getting grumpy and offended about it. This went on for several minutes, and finally I decided I was going to brake check him. I looked in my rearview mirror and got my foot ready, but I didn't see the truck on my tail. Instead, I saw it sliding upside down on its roof through someone's field, a huge cloud of dust rolling along behind it. I kept driving at first because it didn't immediately register that I might have just watched someone seriously injure himself. About 10 minutes down the road, my brain clicked back on and I got that awful feeling. You know, the one you get when you realize you just ignored something potentially life-altering. I turned around and drove like a maniac back to where I thought I had seen the wreck. When I got there were no emergency vehicles, no people, no upside-down truck, nothing. I can still vividly see that truck upside down and the dust cloud behind it. TLDR. Maybe I was tailgated by a ghost truck. Story 28. When I was living in Missouri in either 2012 or 2013, I was feeding my chickens when they suddenly started acting strange and ran inside their coop. I looked up, and I swear to God, I saw a pterodactyl. I watched it glide over my property, then my neighbors, then across a small valley until it was completely out of sight. There is no way it could have been anything else. As plain as day, it was a pterosaur. Very few people besides my wife and my parents believe me, so I don't talk about it much. I even started doing research on pterosaur sightings and emailed a subject matter expert. Apparently, they're not as uncommon as most people think. And before anyone starts judging, I'm not a crazy person. I'm a perfectly sane 34-year-old man with no history of mental problems, and I've held a solid career for the past 10.5 years. I saw a pterosaur, and that is a fact. I simply have no proof other than my word. Edit. I just checked the email I sent. It was on January 2013 at 2:15 in the afternoon. Edit 2. It was a pterosaur, not specifically a pterodactyl, because it had a diamond shape at the end of its tail. I mentioned that later, someone else pointed it out, and I confirmed it through that same email. Story 29. My mom is a nurse. She tells this story about an older gentleman who was her patient during his last days. He was bedridden, very weak, unable to get up or walk around, but still friendly and able to talk. One day, she walked into his room and he was standing up. She was shocked. "Wow, Mr. X, you're up and about. I can't believe it." He chatted with her and told her how great he felt. She couldn't get over it. She eventually left the room and went straight to a coworker to tell her how Mr. X had been up and walking and how they needed to go see him. The coworker said, "Oh, Mr. X actually passed about an hour ago." My mom was like, "What? I just talked to him." But no, he had already died. My mom is convinced she spoke to his spirit, or something very close to it. Story 30. When I was 5, I was playing in my backyard. The yard was long and ended in a fence and a gate with a laneway running parallel to both. I remember looking up at one point and seeing 3 red balloons floating there, tied to strings that disappeared behind the fence. I was curious and started walking toward the balloons, but suddenly I felt a chill run up my spine, and I got goosebumps for the first time in my life. I stopped halfway down the yard, then a clown's head popped up and turned to look at me. It was white and bald with red hair on the sides. There was something deeply sinister about it, like I was nothing more than prey to it, nothing more than an insect. We stared at each other for what felt like a long time. I was too scared to move, rigid as a board. The clown smiled and vanished below the fence. The balloons stayed exactly where they were. Then I heard the latch on the back gate start to rattle. I ran into the house, terrified, crying for my mom. She didn't believe me, but she went out to look. I begged her not to. I cowered in the kitchen, terrified. It felt like forever, but she eventually came back. For a second, before she realized I was watching her, I thought she seemed unsettled. But she smiled and said there were no balloons and no one down the lane. She dismissed it as an overactive imagination. I had nightmares about it for the next few weeks. My mom stayed up with me, trying to convince me it had all been in my head. Eventually, the nightmares faded, and the memory sank into my subconscious. Years later, as an adult, we watched the miniseries It together as a family. The moment Pennywise appeared, goosebumps ran up my spine. I was petrified, rigid as a board again. I looked over at my mom to tell her that this was what the clown had looked like. She looked unsettled, and when our eyes met, I knew. She had seen it too. Story 31. When I was in college, I lived in a 3-story repurposed frat house that had a big field in the back. There was a couple on the same floor as me, and they were expecting a baby. One night, I woke up to what sounded like a baby crying. My first thought was, damn, she's already had the baby? As I fully woke up, I realized the sound was coming from outside, and it wasn't a baby. It was something different. I looked out my window and saw 5 of the most gorgeous animals I've ever seen in my life. They looked like foxes, just wandering around the field. It was honestly one of the most beautiful sights I've ever seen. The strange thing is, I cannot for the life of me find any animal that looks like the ones I saw. They were a silvery white, absolutely gorgeous in color. They stood about as tall as a Great Dane but were much skinnier. Their bodies were super lean, perched on long, thin legs. They seemed light on their feet and moved with this kind of trotting gait. Their faces looked like those of fennec foxes, but they were far larger than any fennec. Their ears were in the same proportions, though, basically a pair of satellite dishes. Their tails were the most striking feature, super fluffy, like a snow fox's tail, but standing straight up in the air, perfectly straight. Their tails didn't move at all, even as they walked. Story 32. I think I saw a gnome. I was with my little sister at the time. I was about 12 and she was 10. It was late and we were running home from our friend's house. In front of our house was a jacuzzi that was never really plugged in. It just sat there. We made it home. But right before we went inside, we heard 3 distinct voices. They were speaking a language we didn't understand. I guess they hadn't heard us coming, because we caught their startled reactions. There were 3 in total from what we could tell. 2 higher-pitched voices and 1 deeper-pitched voice. If anyone has seen Shrek Forever After, the little boy who says, "Do the roar." Their voices sounded kind of like that. Out of the corner of our eyes, we saw them walking along the side of the jacuzzi. They were about 1.5 feet tall from what we could tell. They jumped down from the jacuzzi and ran off, hurrying each other along. My sister and I heard and saw the whole thing. We ran inside and told our mom. She said it was all in our heads, but I know what my sister and I saw that night. Story 33. I was about 13, babysitting 2 young kids, a boy around 9 and his younger sister who was about 5. We were doing the usual stuff, coloring, watching cartoons, playing with toys and video games. The little girl asked if she could have some juice. I said sure and got up to go to the kitchen to get it for her since the cupboards were too high for her to reach. When I got there, I saw this really sweet-faced older woman at the sink washing dishes. She had gray hair pulled back in a simple bun, an apron on, and her sleeves rolled up. She smiled at me. I smiled back, and I assumed she was someone their mother had hired to help keep the place tidy. I said hello and grabbed juice for all of us. But when I turned back around, the woman was gone. I didn't think much of it at first, but later I told the kids to put their cups in the sink because it would be easier on the lady who cleaned their place. The little girl just shrugged and said, "She's just a ghost." Her brother rolled his eyes and said, "Don't be stupid, there's no such thing." But I had seen that woman as clearly as anyone, and the little girl clearly had too. I asked their mom later about the cleaning lady, and she said they didn't have one. I don't think she was lying, and the little girl seemed to genuinely believe the old woman was real. So I have no idea what I actually saw that day. But I do know no one believes it happened, except the little girl, who said she saw this old woman repeatedly. I babysat there a few more times and never saw her again. So, who knows? Story 34. I was getting McDonald's one night with a friend, around 1:30 in the morning on a Tuesday. The way we went, you shoot past McDonald's on the highway and then double back over a bridge. At the light at the end of the bridge, there are 2 businesses on the corner, a veterinary hospital and one of those Native American novelty shops. There was a cop car and a black pickup truck parked outside the novelty shop. The cop had his lights on, but no sirens. There was no one in sight, and the light was red. The light stayed red for about 3 minutes, even after we flashed our brights at it and rolled back and forth to try to trigger the weight sensor. Finally, it changed. When we got up to the second light, it turned red without a yellow, just as we were about to go through. Then, a black pickup truck, a cop car, another black pickup truck, and another cop car pulled off the other road and in front of us. The light changed again, and we went on to McDonald's. The procession of pickup trucks and cop cars followed us in. The pickup trucks pulled up to the dumpster, and the cops blocked the exit. We could see the men in the pickup trucks wearing headsets. As soon as I paid, they all left, the cops lagging behind, so they pulled out in the same procession they'd arrived in originally. It was really bizarre. At the time, I was driving a classic Saab 900 convertible, so it wasn't exactly a common suspect vehicle. We were deep in our alien phase then, and we'd had a lot of strange things happen in that regard. I always wondered if it was connected, but even on its own, the whole thing was just weird. This was right in the heart of the area where the Hudson Valley Triangle sightings took place, and there was at least one event where everyone blew up Facebook, with photos of pillars of light coming down across the area one night. Really strange stuff. We were always seeing weird government activity in odd places. Right after I moved out of the area, an unmarked black helicopter with several men in camo came into my backyard. They hovered so close that the treetops were whipping around in the gust from the rotors. They were close enough to see our family waving, and they waved back. I even have a photo of that one. Story 35. When I was maybe 18, I was walking through the mall with 2 of my friends right before Christmas. The place was packed. There was a family walking a little ways ahead of us, a mother, a father, and 3 kids all under 10. The smallest kid was maybe 4. She stopped to tie her shoe, and since she had probably just learned how, it took her a while. Her family didn't notice she'd stopped. They just kept walking and talking. My friends were chatting and didn't see any of this. I was watching her thinking, geez, how long is it going to take her parents to notice she's not there? She could get taken. This man, who looked completely normal, came out of nowhere. He was wearing a typical early 2000s sweater, jeans, his hair neatly combed, and he was smiling. But something about that smile felt wrong. He knelt down right in front of the little girl and started talking to her. She looked startled and uneasy. I don't think she spoke English. I literally swung my purse into my friend's chest. Basically, hold my bag, it's going down, and started charging toward them. The little girl suddenly bolted toward her family, who gave absolutely no indication that they even realized she'd been missing, and the man just melted into the crowd like he had never been there. I spent a good 20 minutes making my friends, who had missed the entire thing but were on board with looking, search them all with me for this completely unremarkable-looking human. I almost witnessed a child abduction, and literally, no one else saw a thing. Story 36. One day I was walking down the middle of the road away from my house. Cars were parked along both pavements, and it's a quiet street anyway, when what I can only describe as a beach ball-sized blue, orange, and white ball of energy came shooting along the road ahead of me. It then turned into my street, perfectly and smoothly following the exact center of the road. It came flying straight toward me like a comet with a long streaking tail behind it. When it got within a meter or two of me, it suddenly shot off to the side and zigzagged around me, then continued down the middle of the road until it hit the telegraph pole at the junction, where it just fizzled out in a silent explosion. I spent a couple of minutes just standing there with my mouth hanging open, and another few minutes inspecting the telegraph pole, but there was no damage at all, not even a mark. I can only assume it was ball lightning, but nothing I've read about it really matches. And of course, anyone I tell thinks I made it up. Why the hell would I make this up? I still have no idea what it was, but honestly, the strangest part isn't that it happened. It's that it seemed to actively avoid me. It was traveling in a perfectly straight line, following the road exactly. And then the moment I was in its path, it suddenly went wild, as if it were purposely trying not to hit me. Story 37. Oh man, I have a good one. This thread is old, but I hope at least one person sees this. I was 16, working on a community theater play. I was waiting outside the back door of the theater for my friend to show up. We were throwing her a surprise party and I was the lookout. The theater was in a building that also served as a convention center, and from where I was standing, I had a full view of the convention center's exit. We'd been told there was a convention going on, but that was all we knew. Suddenly, a bunch of circus clowns came filing out of the convention center's back door. It was a clown convention. I ran inside shouting, "Clowns, come look! It's a clown convention!" Nobody believed me. They wouldn't even come outside to check. They just sent me back out to resume lookout duty, and the clowns were gone. I guess they'd all gotten into their cars and driven away. Insert obligatory joke about how they probably all got into one car. But seriously, I swear this happened. Story 38. A friend and I were camping on some property my family owns. We were hanging out by the fire when we heard a small rustle behind us. I turned around with my flashlight and shined it in the direction of the noise. My light briefly caught an eye shimmer. Now, I've spent countless days in these woods. I've seen bear, cougar, deer, fisher cats, raccoons, everything that lives out there. But the eye shine caught me off guard because I didn't recognize it. I wrote it off as a raccoon because of the height of the eyes, assuming it was up in a tree. A few minutes later, we heard a twig snap. Closer this time. My dog dove into the tent whimpering. He's not a tough dog. No big deal, I figured. Just an animal. Then, all of a sudden, I absolutely had to poop. I found a tree just out of sight of camp, still close enough to see the glow of the fire. As I was finishing up, I heard a loud bang. I leaned to the side to see around a small tree as I was wiping and saw my buddy standing up, staring toward our van. His flashlight was on the ground, still lit. I'd cleaned myself up enough, so I jumped up and jogged over to him. His mouth was hanging open, and he just started pointing at the Aerostar van we'd come in. On top of it was a giant man, about 7 feet tall, his long arms wrapped around the roof. His feet were tucked under him in a kind of squatting position. He was just sitting there, shaking the van back and forth. I could see the suspension collapsing under his weight, and the whole van made this loud squeaking noise as he rocked it. I slowly leaned down to grab my buddy's flashlight. As I raised it, the thing turned and looked right at us. I got the beam up to about its ankles before it suddenly leapt off the van in the opposite direction and crashed into the woods with massive, heavy steps. My friend immediately said we needed to leave. It was so strange, I can hardly believe it happened. Story 39. A friend of my father's owns a cabin out in the middle of nowhere in eastern Oregon. The land surrounding the cabin has since been bought by natural resource companies, but because he owns property there, he has squatter's rights and can legally travel through the private land to reach his cabin. This private property creates at least a 2-mile buffer in every direction where no one else, aside from workers, should ever be present. I was there with my father, my uncle, and the friend who owned the cabin when I was about 7. It was the middle of the night, and we were all asleep, when a car alarm suddenly began going off in the distance. It was far too distant to be the car we had driven there. This was already unsettling because nobody else was supposed to be there, but we waited for a while to see if the alarm would stop. After probably 5 minutes, the men decided they had to go out and see what was going on, since the alarm just kept blaring. I didn't want to be left alone, so I went with them. We could see headlights in the distance, maybe 500 yards away, near the tree line. The cabin sat in a field that opened up from the forest, so the lights were easy to spot. When we reached the vehicle, it looked like a very old military jeep. Nobody was around. We called out, but there was no reply, and there were no keys in the ignition. As my father's friend popped the hood, the alarm suddenly stopped, and the headlights shut off. He looked inside and exclaimed that there was no battery, meaning the alarm shouldn't have been able to go off at all. We hurried back to the cabin and had a very sleepless night before leaving early the next morning. The Jeep was still there when we left, but I have no idea what happened to it after that. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss an update.